At the beginning of the movie, we see Professor Heiter sitting in his car, staring at a picture. In the picture, there are 3 dogs connected to each other. Meanwhile, a truck pulls over nearby, and the truck driver heads into the woods to relieve himself. At this moment, Professor Heiter approaches the driver from behind, aiming his gun at him. The scene then changes, and we see 2 girls, one named Jenny and the other named Lindsay, who have come to Germany for a trip. They were planning to attend a party, so they were trying to get the location on their phone. Being new to the area, they didn't know much about Germany. They rent a car and head out at night for the party. While driving through the forest, they end up far off course and lose their way. Suddenly, their car's tire gets punctured. Lindsay tries to call a repair service, but there's no signal in the forest, and they find themselves stuck in a place where there is no one around for miles. They decide to stay in the car and wait for someone to pass by so they can ask for help. After a while, a car does pass by, and they try to wave it down for help. Inside the car, there's an old man who starts making creepy gestures at them, which frightens both of the girls. They quickly lock the car doors. The strange man drives away. After that, the girls decide to get out of the car and look for a nearby house where they can make a call for help. As they walk, they eventually see a light coming from a house in the distance. They head towards the house. It starts raining heavily, soaking both of them, and they knock on the door urgently. The 2 arrive at the house and knock on the door. Professor Heiter opens it. They quickly explain their situation, mentioning the car trouble. The professor invites them inside, his home filled with eerie paintings that make the pair uneasy. As they sit down, Professor Heiter asks, "Are you travelers?" The girl replies, "No, we're from New York. We're visiting Germany." They also ask if he can call a mechanic for their car. Ignoring their request, the professor asks, "Are you 2 relatives?" The girl responds, "No, we're just friends." The professor gets up, claiming he'll get them some water. He walks into the kitchen, pretending to make the call, but in reality, he laces their water with a drug. He returns with the drinks, handing them over. The girl, Lindsay, drinks hers completely, but the girl, Jenny, drops her glass. The professor yells at Jenny and goes to the basement to get a towel to clean up the mess. While there, he fills a syringe with a drug. Meanwhile, the drugs start taking effect on Lindsay, making her drowsy. Jenny, still unaware, insists again that the professor call for help, but Heiter refuses. Suddenly, he injects Jenny with the drug, knocking her out instantly. Jenny and Lindsay regain consciousness, only to find themselves strapped to beds in the professor's lab. Alongside them is another man, the truck driver from earlier. Professor Heiter enters the room and looks at the truck driver. "You're not suitable," he says, before injecting the driver with poison. The driver dies on the spot, and the professor drags his body to the garden to bury him. Soon after, the professor brings in another unconscious man and places him on a bed next to Jenny and Lindsay. He then puts on a lab coat, introducing himself as Professor Heiter, a former surgeon with a disturbing obsession, surgically joining living beings. He proudly tells them about his recent experiment, where he stitched 3 dogs together, and now he intends to perform the same operation on them. Their skin tissues, he reveals, are a perfect match. Professor Heiter explains the procedure. "I'll remove your knee ligaments so you can never stand. Then I will surgically attach subject B's mouth to subject A's rear and subject C to subject B, creating a human centipede." He describes how when subject A eats, the food will pass through B and C, turning into waste. It's a grotesque and horrific experiment, and he is about to perform it on humans for the first time. The professor injects the first man, putting him to sleep. Just as he moves toward Jenny to do the same, Lindsay manages to free herself from her restraints using her teeth. She makes a desperate attempt to escape. She locks herself in a room, but the professor smashes through the window, forcing her to flee again. She runs until she falls into a pool. Hader catches up with her and traps her there, but suddenly, the lights go out, allowing Lindsay to escape. She returns to the lab, frees Jenny, and drags her outside. Just when they think they're free, the professor injects Lindsay, knocking her out once again. Both are dragged back into the lab, where Professor Hader completes his gruesome surgery. Days later, the human centipede is ready, though their wounds are still fresh. The professor forces them to stand and even takes pictures of his creation. He shows them their reflection in the mirror, and they weep at the sight of themselves. He keeps them in a cage, treating them like animals, feeding them inhumanely. One day, outside in the yard, the man at the front of the centipede feels the need to relieve himself. His waste travels into Lindsay's mouth, forcing her to swallow it. It's a horrifying and disgusting moment. Soon, the professor examines them and finds that while the man is healthy, Lindsay is suffering from severe constipation, unable to digest the waste. Jenny, the last in the chain, is growing weaker, as she hasn't consumed anything. Hader realizes that she may die soon and begins planning to replace her. Just then, there's a knock at the door. 2 police officers have arrived, looking for Jenny and Lindsay, who have been missing for days. Their car was found not far from the professor's house. Hader explains that he's a doctor and has been too busy to leave the house. He claims to know nothing about the girls. The professor heads to the kitchen to get the officers some water, but secretly drugs it, hoping to knock them out. One officer mentions that a neighbor heard strange sounds from the house, which agitates the professor. He yells at the officers, insisting they drink the water. The officers, suspicious, refuse and knock the glasses over. Professor Hader, now panicking, pretends to fetch towels from the basement, but secretly grabs a syringe. He attempts to drug the officers, but they catch him in the act. Without a warrant, they decide to leave and return later. Realizing he's running out of time, the professor rushes back to his lab, only to find the human centipede gone. Suddenly, the first man stabs him with a piece of glass, and the centipede tries to crawl upstairs. Hader regains consciousness and gives chase. The man in the lead breaks a window, and as the professor approaches, he cuts his own throat with the glass, dying instantly. The officers return to the house, hearing the commotion, but finding no one at first. They split up to search the place. One of the officers finds the human centipede, but is shot by the professor. The remaining officer rushes in and, after a brief struggle, shoots the professor dead. The film ends with the human centipede left in their horrific state, the only survivors in the aftermath of the madness.